Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak, and I would like to talk about some books that I have read and some books that I hope to read or plan to read. Last week I made a video talking about having finished Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Having accomplished that, and it did feel like an accomplishment, I've realized that I can read more than I thought I could. I'm not as weak of a reader. Well, I've spent more than a year now making that a dedication of mine, a solid dedication of reading. And I think I have improved, and I can possibly offer up some proof in this video that I have improved, but I have to get there first, I guess. So first, let me just briefly talk about Moses Finley, who was a major historian that I read when I was quite young and trying to understand history. And I read his book, Ancient History, Evidence and Models. Well, over the years, I've read most of his books, but there was one book that I have not been able to get into. I've started it at least once, and that's Ancient History. I think it originally had a subtitle, Ancient History to the Arab Conquests, and that's because it was part of a 3-volume set. Well, I was, not interested in the 3-volume set. What would I care about Sicily from the Arab conquests on, right? But having read Gibbon, I've changed my mind on that, as on a lot of things. When you consider the place of Sicily in the Mediterranean, it occurred to me, well, I could probably learn a lot of stuff reading that set of 3 books. It was 3 books. The first book was written by Moses Finley. The second 2 were by Dennis Mack Smith. So there's a medieval Sicily and a modern Sicily. Now, the Dennis Mack Smith books, I believe he has done a revision and consolidated them into one book, but I really want to read the set as it came out. If I feel like I need to read more, he's written other books or he wrote other books. I would suppose he may no longer be among the living, although I have not checked that out. Moses Finley is not. This is a revised version, a revised edition, so it won't exactly fit with the other 2, but with Sir Moses, I want to read the latest revision of his, and I doubt that there have been really many changes. Probably at best some corrections. So that's what I have on the agenda after I finish the 3-volume set, History of the Crusades by Stephen Runciman, which I also am inspired to read after having read Gibbon. Now, after I made the last video, I mentioned I was reading this, papers from a symposium about Gibbon 200 years after the initial publication of his first volume, and I enjoyed it very much. If you read Gibbon, you might want to look at that. One essay was a bit of a clunker, the last one, or the last but one. But all in all, it was very good to hear what historians such as Bernard Lewis, Arnaldo Momigliano, and Runciman himself had to say about it. But everybody, all the rest were historians I had not heard of, but they were all good, again, except for one. After I read that book, I read Anne of Green Gables in this beautiful Puffin and Pantone edition. You can see that. It was a fine book. if you like reading children's literature. I know some booktubers get offended if you call a book like this or other books children's literature, but I don't think that calling something children's literature needs to be a slur. This is a very good book for what it is. So if you're interested in reading let me say, an incredibly well-written prose account, fictional though, of a young girl's growing up on Prince Edward Island in Canada, a sort of a privileged white girl's Bildungsroman. This is a great book to read. It's part of a whole set of at least 9 other books, I think. Well, there's novels and there's short stories, and I looked into them, but at the end, after reading it, I thought, well, I don't need to read any more of Anne. This was enough. I do have my reservations about the book, but why go into that here? I like the Pantone so much. I bought this thing by Stevenson. Maybe I'll read it one day. So the next thing that I read after Anne, the next thing that I read was Bernard Lewis. That's right. I was inspired to that from reading an essay by him in the Gibbon book. It's a memoir, Notes on a Century, because he indeed lived to 102, or just shy of 102. And it's a reflection on his life. Memoirs, I think, are all pretty much the same. He sort of marred his life in the last decade or so by hanging out with Dick Cheney. He wanted to defend himself in this book. He said, I never suggested or I never approved of the invasion of Iraq. In fact, I was against it, he said. But when you hang out with those crowds and people tar you with a lie or an allegation, what can you do? You know, do we take the word of a man who felt that Dick Cheney was misrepresented by the liberal media? That's exactly what he said in the book. Otherwise, I mean, I like Bernard Lewis, especially the former or older Bernard Lewis, younger Bernard Lewis. His history works are where you should go if you want to read the topics that he writes about. He's very good. So after that, I moved into, it's spending so much time on Gibbon, I didn't get to read hardly anything from outside of Europe. So I read this. 6 Records of a Floating Life. And the 6 records means 6 chapters. The final 2 chapters either were lost or never got written. It is the first 3 chapters that are really the heart of the book. The author talks about his wife. It's broken into 3 parts. Let's see. The chapter titles are perfect. So part 1, the joys of the wedding chamber. It has the whole beginnings of their relationship and their marriage. The pleasures of leisure is the second part, their life together. And then the sorrows of misfortune. He lost his wife early. And there is a 4th part, the delights of roaming afar. He was a wandering administrator, I guess. He, as a man who failed the examinations, he had to become a secretary for government officials, and that's what he did. And he had a bit of a peregrine life. Sort of sad, but he did a lot of hiking, a lot of mountain climbing, that kind of thing. The 3rd section is the longest section, but it's probably the least interesting, except when it touches on his wife. And the love story is truly outstanding. It's not like the kind of love story that I read in the tales of the Arabian Nights, meaning with, young Romeo and Juliet's becoming infatuated with each other. This is a real, genuine, mature romance out of China. So you have to accept the fact that the romance is shortcut because the man's wife died. But for what there is, it's absolutely lovely. So the next thing I read was As I Crossed a Bridge of Dreams, which at first I thought I hadn't read it, but I did read it about 6 years ago when I was reading some Heian literature, beginning with the tale of Genji. I read this, I started, there's an introduction by Ivan Morris, which is excellent. And I said, I know I've read this, but have I read the book? Because sometimes I'll read a penguin without reading the book. Well, there's an incident with a cat that threw the game away. Yes, indeed, I read this book 6 years ago. But I got nothing out of it, absolutely nothing out of it. I think the terrain was completely alien to me, and I just could not relate at all. Well, this time it was a completely different experience. Perhaps I kind of knew a little bit where I was heading with it, and it's a sparse book. You'll read it in a day. I mean, Penguin has done everything they could, including a fairly sizable introduction, to space out the page count. It's illustrated, and the illustrations are lovely. So I can't give it as a recommend exactly. It depends on how sort of in tune you are to old Japanese writing. Mostly diaries, I think, is what the women wrote, none of whom have names that are recognizable. They're all known by the name of some man that they have some connection with, their father or something like that. But be that as it may, who am I to judge? And then the most recent thing that I read, well, this is C.P. Snow. Now, these two books are exactly the same book. You wouldn't know it by the cover. I checked them out from my library because I didn't really want to spend money on either of the books. Well, not either of the books. There's a third one here. You've probably heard about this, or if you haven't, it's something that it's worth knowing about, the little controversy. He gave a talk about the two cultures in which he posited a divide between scientists and literati, or members of the literate intelligentsia, the literary intelligentsia. That's what I'm going for. And a couple of years later, F.R. Leavis gave a speech on the same topic, and he did not answer Snow's points, but basically what he did was tear down Snow as sort of a fake member of the intelligentsia. I'm using our phrases. This is not at all how they would have talked about it, but we use words like fake now all the time, at least in the U.S., since the former occupant popularized the term fake. Donald Trump said something, and now we all have to talk the way he does. So Snow's essay, it's very short, but there's a second look in it as well. Both books have this. And I actually thought the second look was better than the first look. The first lecture was not all that good. It's fairly trite, actually, but you don't really need my opinions on it. In the second look, he does make mention of Dostoevsky, and he puts his finger exactly on an aspect of Dostoevsky that I really dislike. And I've never seen anybody talk about it, and I think it's wonderful. But aside from that, well, F.R. Leavis, as I said, he begins with a sort of a sidebar talking about Snow's novels. Snow is not even worthy of being called a novelist. He's not up to the task. And honestly, Leavis makes his case. So this also has a couple of different, I guess, speeches. I'm not done with this yet. I've read the first one, which is very good. Leavis is very good. But the essay got reprinted in Britain and then in the U.S. And for both of those publications, he wrote introductions. And the introduction for its publication in the U.S., just about 3 pages or so, is just excellent. I mean, the thing is, you have to read all of this, and then you have to read his lecture, and then read his introductions to get there. And there's yet another, I believe, lecture or else essay that he wrote, kind of taking a second look after the fact, which I have not gotten to. But what it comes down to is Leavis is defending principles of criticism. And I think we've really fallen away from that. In fact, let me read a paragraph from it. It's really wonderful. Although, when you read this stuff, you have to gear up to a kind of, I think you'd call it real discursive writing. Long sentences with phrases chopped out that you have to follow the phrase and then get back to the subject of the sentence or whatever the clause is that's dependent on it. So, the supersession in what should be the field of real intellectual and spiritual authority, of serious criteria by the power of creating publicity values, is a frightening manifestation of the way our civilization is going. It is a concomitant of the technological revolution. That was the way society was going in the early 60s. I would say we have gone there. And part of having gone there is nobody very much is interested in literary criticism anymore. If you follow BookTube, you find people are more interested in reviews. But reviews are largely a part of this whole sort of dumbing down of the cultural conversation. A critic can write a review, though it is probably not likely to. Some do. They can get paid for it, and if they have a name, they can get paid pretty well, I guess. But it's virtually impossible that a reviewer could write criticism. It may have happened. I'm not going to say it hasn't happened, but I think the possibility of that is slim. Anyhow, I did not mean to go into a rant about reviewing, but this is just marvelous. Here's the 3. Now, there's an edition of this. I mean, this is the latest edition, and Snow also exists in this, and I don't know what that contains. I got these from the library, and Chicago Public Library, having these, decided not to get the new one, and I don't blame them. I never get books from the Chicago Public Library because they generally do not have what I want, but in this case they did, and so I availed myself of it. So that's the recent reads. Let's see if I can do one of these things and close out in such a way that I feel like a genuine BookTuber. Whoops, don't put Stevenson in there. So this is what I have. Very good. Maybe I should put my head there and then I can do do a picture at the beginning. Anyhow, that's what I've got to say. I could have talked more, but my problem is I tend to be too verbose, and then I go at length and the video cuts off. So thank you very much for stopping by.